Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Thanos to Theos, a podcast for youth and student workers committed to reaching teens with the gospel, featuring conversations from culture and comics to ministry and theology. Thanos to Theos is part of the Rooted family of podcasts, which also includes Ask Alice, the Rooted Parent podcast, and the Rooted Youth Ministry podcast. And we're really happy to be part of this network. Rooted is committed to advancing gospel-centered youth ministry. So if you want to learn more, check out the website, www.rootedministry.com. I'm one of your hosts, Clark Fobes. I'm the associate pastor at First Baptist Church in San Francisco, and here are my co-hosts.
I'm Mike McGarry. I'm the youth pastor at South Shore Baptist Church in Hingham, Massachusetts.
And I'm Kevin Yee, college and young adults pastor at Church Everyday in Los Angeles, California.
And we have the immense pleasure of being joined by another esteemed, amazing guest, Michelle Ami Reyes. Michelle, thanks so much for being on the show. There are so many hats that you wear, and so many. Oh, sorry, I should say Dr. Michelle Ami Reyes. There's so much that you do. You're the vice president on the Asian American Christian Collaborative. You're also part of a church plant. You're a co-church planter. Why don't you just share a little bit about yourself with us as we have you on this podcast? Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is like the highlight of my week. I'm so thrilled to be with you all. I mean, I am such a Marvel fan. My husband and I have like watched every single one together. And I feel like the Marvel movies characterize our, like from our beginning of our marriage, like throughout our 20s and early 30s. So I feel like we can chronicle Marvel films with like major milestones in our life.
That's amazing.
That is so good.
The next generation will not have that sort of connection with Marvel. But as you mentioned, I'm the vice president of the Asian American Christian Collaborative, co-church planter and scholar in residence at Hope Community Church in Austin, Texas. And I'm the author of Becoming All Things. And I mentioned my husband, and I also have two amazing kids, 6 and 3. So glad to be here.
Thanks so much. And scholar in residence. I love that. That's like a title. Yes. That's my dream title.
I know, right? How do you get that?
That is amazing. And you were also, you were teaching adjunct at Wheaton. Is that still the case? Are you somewhere else right now doing any teaching?
Yeah, so my husband also, beyond being the lead pastor at our church, he also serves as academic dean for a local seminary called Vida House, which serves to provide theological training for Black and Brown Christians who want to pursue vocational ministry but can't follow traditional channels, either because of lack of funding, or they don't have a bachelor's degree or things like that. And so we're really trying to think outside the box in terms of like how to provide seminary level training to the next generation. And I serve as core faculty there for Vida House.
Awesome.
Wow, that's really cool.
That's really cool. Yes.
And one more question. Our listeners have to know this about you. Your PhD was in, please explain this for us. I think it's so cool.
Yes. My PhD is in 18th century German literature. So I cut my teeth with folklore. I'm a folklorist by trade. So folklore, fantasy, studying text, studying the Bible literarily. That's my jam.
Super interesting. What was your concentration in there?
Yeah, so German, Italian, French folklore, as well as feminist revisions of folklore. So I taught a sort of a recurring circuit of those sorts of classes, both at Moody Bible Institute downtown Chicago, University of Illinois, and then down here in Texas when we first came in church planted.
Wow.
That's super
incredible.
So, okay, I have to ask. So how much overlap do you see between all that PhD focus that you were just talking about and like Marvel, DC comic folklore?
Oh, love it. Well, I mean, folklore and fantasy and legend, they all sort of have these different points of connection, right? And so even talking about legends, bringing in Germanic mythology, talking about Thor, like we had all those sorts of conversations in our classes, but also like understanding the hero of folklore, which is very different from the hero of fantasy mythology. Folklore heroes are they're not the fastest, the strongest, the smartest. Female heroes are smart. They know how, they're clever. They know how to outwit their perpetrators. The male hero it's usually like the youngest son. He's completely helpless on his own. Like he's the guy that gets lost in the forest and sits down and cries because he doesn't know what to do. But because he's been
That
compassionate.
sounds like Thor to me, Kevin. Just sits and cries because he doesn't know what to do.
He wants his
But without the
mommy.
muscles, right? But because he's been compassionate to other people in need or compassionate to other animals, different people and beings come to his aid. So it's like a collaborative solving the problem. And so I think that's a unique aspect of folklore that differentiates itself oftentimes from fantasy, which is all about like the hero who conquers and saves the day.
That's super interesting.
It is.
Wow.
Yeah.
We should talk about that more in another time when we have you on.
Hey,
Yeah.
I have so many
sounds good.
questions.
I mean, we could probably fill a whole episode of just asking Michelle questions about
I think so.
her studies. And,
Sorry, I've already taken us way off topic. Yeah.
And you know, all our listeners, as you could probably tell, Michelle's probably more qualified to be a host of this podcast than any of us are. So
For sure. For
It's
it's been a
sure.
long
that.
time coming to have you on here.
I don't have a gauntlet or a hammer on my bookshelf. I have a long way to go.
It's to compensate for my lack of knowledge.
Right. Like I can buy that at a store. It doesn't take years of study to become worthy in that sense, right?
Right. Well, so for this episode, we have the privilege of having Michelle join us to talk about the most recent MCU movie that just came out, The Eternals. And this one had a lot of hype and was really exciting. And one of the reasons we want to bring on Michelle was because, Michelle, you have a lot of expertise and you're very vocal and have a strong voice in diversity and diversity, both racially, socioeconomically, and when it comes to ministry, when it comes to the gospel lens. And this was probably, if not the most diverse movie we've gotten so far in the MCU. So there's just a lot of excitement around that. It's also the one where we got our very first Indian, not Indian American, but just, right.
Pakistani.
Indian, right. Pakistani, but Indian in the show character or in the movie, right? He becomes a Bollywood star.
Right.
So that we wanted to also bring you in for that. Those of you listening or watching, if you don't know, Michelle is a fellow half Asian as myself, half Indian, half white American. And so that's part of the reason we wanted to bring Michelle on, but also there's just a lot to talk about. I mean, I feel like even more given where I keep calling it show, where this movie stemmed from with like mythology and folklore, you're like the perfect person to talk about this with. So, but first off, let's just talk about any initial first impressions of the film. I know it's gotten a lot of mixed reviews. What are your guys' thoughts just in general as a movie watching experience?
When the movie was over, I went to the movie with my young adult Bible study group who meets on Thursday nights, and we canceled Bible study to go and watch the movie together.
No, you didn't cancel it. You moved locations.
Moved the location. Time and location was changed.
I'm not sure how much Bible study there was, but there was some really good fellowship. And so a bunch of us went, and I brought my 13-year-old son with us too, and it was a lot of fun. But then you go in
awkward.
and there I was like, ooh, awkward moments. Matt, look over there.
By the way, we should
eyes.
say this is going to be a spoiler podcast.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
So
this
just
is
a
not
disclaimer. If you haven't
spoiler-free.
seen it,
So
we're definitely going to spoil everything.
Yeah.
So, all those things aside, after the movie was over, we walked out, and I really actually was surprised how much I liked the movie and thought that it was pretty good. And the more I think about the movie, the more that opinion has changed. So my take is as an individual movie, it's fine. Not great, but not terrible. But as a movie that fits within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it just doesn't work. There's so many continuity problems.
And I'll just
Yeah.
piggyback off that before you guys share your thoughts, because I have the same impression. I had the same impression as Mike. Movie was over, credits rolling. I was like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Well, plus, like, I think, Clark, we discussed, like, our expectations had been dragged through the mud so
They
low
were,
that I just
yeah.
wasn't expecting much from it
Well,
anymore.
so here's the thing. It's because this is the lowest rated MCU movie on Rotten Tomatoes, lower than Thor Dark World, Thor 2. And yet I came out of the theater still thinking Thor Dark World is still the worst movie in the MCU. Sorry, Kevin. So I'll just leave it at that. And the more I thought about it as it fits with MCU timeline, but even just the development of the plot and the characters, there's just, my main thing is I just keep thinking there was so much missed opportunity. That's the main thing for me. It didn't fulfill what it really could have been. So anyways, you guys go.
Yep. Michelle, you want to give your take before mine?
Sure. Yeah, well, now that you brought up Thor Dark World, that has been my least favorite film until the release of the Eternals.
Oh,
and now there's a rival.
I'm a Thor Dark World
on why it's
apologist, by the way.
Sometimes.
But yes, keep going. This is great.
So-
Anything that makes it higher on anybody's list, collective list, is a good thing.
I don't know if that's
at
what
the
you should be
bottom.
Yeah, see.
But so for me, the main reason why I didn't like the Eternals was its lazy storytelling. The story goes back and forth between modern day and the past, showing how the Eternals have defended humans throughout all of these different centuries, from ancient Babylon to the Gupta Empire, people during the time of Spanish conquerors and whatnot. And so I'll say one caveat is that what I did think that the film got right was the struggle for the characters between like what their mission is and what their individual or moral responsibility is. I think that's a hallmark of the MCU. And so you see that classic tension being played out. But that being said, I thought the flashbacks didn't serve its purpose. It didn't give us greater insight into the characters. And then also another hallmark of Marvel films is witty banter, relatable characters, unique personalities, but the Eternals just felt flat. They had no depth. They're not relatable, and they don't have unique perspectives on history, which is why I really appreciated there was this article in the New Yorker where Richard Brody argues that for all their endurance of zipping through time, like the Eternals they haven't learned much of anything. They don't offer any incredible wisdom that you think somebody who's lived thousands of years would be able to offer. Obviously, the director, Chloe Zhao, was trying to do something new here. She was trying to breathe in a sort of new form of originality into the MCU. It's the talkiest film, right? There's so much dialogue going on. That's different. And I think that, like Clark said, there was so much potential for commentary on complex issues of what it means to be human. But we just can't get there because the characters are flat and they're too shallow for deep reflection.
Yeah, I'm on Team Michelle here. So I've been telling the guys, like, I'm not angry at this movie the way I think some people are legitimately, like, they hate this thing and they're angry at it. I was saying that I'm not mad at the movie. I'm sad at the movie. Like,
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
I'm super disappointed. I think the ideas, like, from the moment the movie starts, right? It says in the beginning. Right? There's that crawl, and it says in the beginning, and I was like, all right, I'm ready for this. So my expectations were low because everyone was talking about the Rotten Tomatoes thing, and then it starts different, right? Like, there was no Marvel theme song. Like, they just went right into in the beginning, and it was all that. And I was like, okay, this is different. This is going to be great. And so my expectations in the first 5 minutes just shot up. And I think from there, it was just like, oh no. Just, it gets worse and worse. And the more I think about the movie, I think they had such cool ideas. Like the idea of them being around for thousands of years, like the idea of them being, and this comes up in the title credits. It doesn't really come up during the movie, but this idea that there are gods that human beings worship that were kind of based off of their characters. They never explored it. Like, that's such a cool idea. Halfway through the movie, I leaned over to my friends and I was like, am I watching a DC movie? Like, what is this? Right? Like, I was like, this is the same vibes that I'm getting from, like, Justice League and Batman v Superman. Like, it's just
true.
Kind of dour and dark, and like, where's the MCU fun and joy that I want from these movies? Like, even Black Widow, which is a movie about, like, abuse, there's like moments of, like, joy that's, like, spark through and come through that, you know, and the like the sisterhood of the main characters. But, like, this movie, like, I don't buy the relationships because there's just not enough time. There's tension 10 characters. You're introduced to all 10. And then just as a whole, the plot falls apart once you really start to think about why everyone's doing what they're doing. And there just wasn't enough time to develop it. Like, this would have been better as a Disney Plus show, or there needs to be like a 5-hour Chloe Zhao cut or something to just give me, you know, moments where I care about the characters. Yeah, there needs to, because there wasn't, and this movie's not short, right? It was like 2 hours and 45 minutes, which I will say I didn't sit there wishing like, oh, this needs to be cut, that needs to be cut. Like, it wasn't boring in that sense, but it was weighty in ways that I didn't feel like served the characters. Like Michelle, you were talking about how they don't seem to have wisdom from beings that are thousands of years old. Like that scene when they're eating around Gilgamesh's table and they're talking about the Avengers. Like, I was like, okay, this is supposed to be like quippy banter and blah, but I was just thinking to myself, like, this doesn't fit anyone's character. Like, I don't really understand what's happening here. So ultimately, it's definitely below a Thor the Dark World, guys. Like, there's no question about that.
I just want to point something out. Everyone, you guys always give me so much grief for being Mr. Critical, and Mike doesn't like anything, and Mike criticizes everything, and Kevin just loves everything.
Right, and I'm the fanboy of this. Yeah, I love everything Marvel does.
I'm probably the one of the three of us who enjoyed it the most. Probably, and Kevin is Mr. Critical here, and I'm just so enjoying this.
Yes.
It's because I'm sad. It broke my heart.
It's Kevin's turn to finally be the villain of our podcast.
Angry Kevin. We're getting angry Kevin here. We need more angry Kevin.
But Michelle's on my side. Let's fight. Let's do this.
No. Michelle's in a realm of her own.
Yeah. No. Well, and I mean, we all fundamentally agree. None of us liked the movie. It's just degrees of hate.
So you said something, Kevin, that sparked this thought. Because all the DC movies we agreed feel the same way. Michelle, I don't know what your thoughts are in the DCU, but generally our take is similar to this movie, right? Very unrelatable, very distant.
Yeah, minus Wonder Woman. It's all
minus Wonder Woman.
Yeah,
right,
the original Wonder Woman.
Right. And I wonder if it's because, like, in Wonder Woman, you see a lot of her character come out and like the humanity of it. Even though she's a god, but she's like learning from humanity. She's walking with them. Whereas you just don't see that in any of the other DC movies. And so this is like kind of my take is superheroes that are based on gods or just purely act like gods fall flat because there's just this distance. There's not this entrance into humanity. And they tried to do that with Cersei's character because they keep saying she loves people. And maybe that's why she was the most where she's the character we're most drawn to. But I wonder if there's something there. And even like as we think about our own mythos, for instance, so to speak, as a Christian tradition, there's power there in God who became flesh. Whereas in the Eternals in the DC movies, you just get these flat, distant gods that are just really doing their own thing and not really coming of their own to identify with humanity, I guess I should say. So I don't know any takes on that, or you can fight me on it if you want, Kevin.
Well, I would agree, Clark. I think so. I grew up reading Indian mythology. I do love the core of mythology because I think what is the point about reading about gods and goddesses if not to better understand the human experience? And in many ways, the stories of gods is supposed to better help us understand our own hearts as humans, whether it's compassion or greed. I will say, if I was to offer a positive comment about the Eternals, it would be this. I do think there's something theologically compelling in the story, in that at the end of the day, the Eternals don't want to live in this repeating cycle of annihilation. They want to live in a world of justice and peace and love. And so I think in this sense, you could argue that there is a parallel between the high level concept of the film and a sort of a Christological cosmology, in that at the end of the day, and this is a spoiler alert, I suppose, the Eternals defy Arashim, and they fight for the Earth's redemption, right? Mm-hmm. And we see in Scripture that Christ is at the very heart of the cosmos. He's the heartbeat, the life force, the pattern after which it's built. We have Colossians 1 that talks about, Christ is the firstborn of all creation. From him, all things in heaven and earth were created, and so on. So Jesus, if you will, is the greater Arashim. And though the whole earth has been marred by sin and is deserving of death, Jesus steps in and redeems us. And so I think if you were to make if there was a theological connection to be made there, I think it would be that.
And yet we serve a God who created people and loves people. And there were no people in this movie. Like, the only actual humans in the movie were Dane Whitman, who was in the movie for 5 minutes,
yeah,
and Karun, and
right. The valet.
Otherwise, so there were 12 characters total in the entire movie, 10 Eternals and these two humans. And there was just no real meaningful connection between the Eternals and the people who they supposedly loved so much,
right,
that they wanted to save them. Well, I guess Phastos' husband, right? So his family.
Right, and that's the problem with the movie. It doesn't have the development that you need in order to get that. So there's that scene in the university where there's that earthquake, and then Cersei turns that giant stone into sand. By the way, that's supposed to be like a historical artifact, is it not? She's like, we don't interfere with human stuff, and then she just makes this 1,000-year-old artifact just disappear into sand to save this girl. And it's that stuff that I felt like the movie should have leaned into that more, because there's that scene where she turns the bus into rose petals. That was awesome, but it was such a fleeting moment. They never dwell on any of those kinds of things, and I felt like that could have sold her character better had she been wrestling with some of that stuff, and then all of a sudden she's using her. And they even make a joke of her powers, which is why, again, this movie does weird things where it's what's your power? Well, I could turn this into metal, I could turn that into metal, I could turn stone into metal. And it's why are they making fun of her powers? She's clearly pretty powerful and she can use it for a lot of good, but that stuff doesn't come across in the movie.
Yeah, I agree with Michelle. I think it's just lazy script writing. And I feel like they developed the plot line for the movie around how do we wedge the Eternals into the MCU and explain away why they haven't done anything until now. I feel like that was the central question of the plot line, and that's just a bad way to start a compelling story.
Right, they pretty much had to start with an apologetic for why.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
instead of actually telling these people's stories,
right.
They started on defense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so as we think more about maybe what could have been for the movie, I mean, Kevin, you mentioned, and I guess for me, this is what was compelling about the thought of the movie and why it was a missed opportunity. You have all these super diverse casts, they're all heavy hitters in their own countries or, genres or whatnot, all from different backgrounds, racial, ethnic backgrounds, nationalities. They could have really leaned into the different origin myths and the different gods that people are worshiping. Maybe that would have drawn in more of that humanity tie-in or connection. But Michelle, you even shared that National Geographic featurette or small little trailer about what they're trying to do, but they didn't really come up on it. But I guess as we're thinking about what could have been and these characters, and we tie that into the mythos that we see around us, I guess the question is just really what can we draw out of that as we think about these different characters and who they were maybe supposed to represent? And even if the movie didn't do justice to that, how can we draw off that now as we're reflecting on it? And even just thinking about for ourselves and for, ministry to students, making some of those connections for them, even if the movie didn't.
Okay, one thing that comes to mind for me is when you're thinking about this idea that they're supposed to be godlike beings. I think one of the questions I had going into it was, are they going to present certain okay, so again, I'm coming into this as a pastor, right? Because I'm always thinking I'm going to have to talk about this stuff soon. But like, who's the sovereign being and how are they going to be portrayed? Because I feel like the MCU has a very cynical view on sort of ultimate sovereignty. You know, like with the Loki series, you had that whole thing about time and who rule, and does anything matter if everything's all plotted out to begin with? Like that sort of thing, right? And so you have Arshem, who's clearly portrayed in that way. He's not a good guy in this movie. He's the villain essentially, right? Along with the Eternals themselves, who go along with this plan. And so there's definitely a layer of this idea of religious fundamentalism, right? What does it mean to be a religious fanatic, and then to deconstruct all of that stuff? So I thought that stuff was actually played really well. And I almost wish if that was going to be the main theme of the movie, that they leaned much harder into all of that. Because I think that in and of itself would have been more compelling for Icarus's story and what happened with Ajax and all that stuff. So the idea is like that idea is there, but it doesn't fully go in that direction, so that falls flat. So what's weird about this movie is I left thinking, what is there really to talk about other things we didn't like? Because they don't really go far enough into any of these things that make it worth talking about, because I can't help but just, but then do this, but then do that, but then do this. But it is, I mean, there's certainly a lot to talk about with regards to like Ajax, right? Deconstructing from her purpose, Icarus deconstructing, and then even Kingo at the end of the movie, the apex of like, there's gonna be this huge battle, and he's just like, nah, I can't, I'm out. Like, and he just leaves, and I'm like, what the heck? There's gonna be a final battle without finger guns? What is the point of this? But I was thinking, like, okay, is there a way to talk about this in a redemptive way? And it's like, well, but there are some people when it comes to like religion where they're just kind of like that. They're just kind of apathetic to the whole thing, and they just kind of, you know, and I'm like, okay, all right, well, those are realistic ways people respond to things, you know, and I think that, you know, there's something there.
So I'm going to be honest, I did not even notice he was missing from the last battle until you just said that.
Are you serious? No way.
Remember, his valet is like the most like human moment is when he's just like, thank you for fighting for me, even though like, yeah, how could you miss that? Well, I mean,
I do remember that.
Honestly, that was one of my favorite scenes so as I was thinking about my response, that scene is the one that I've discussed the most with people. And my unpopular opinion about the movie is just that I actually like that he wasn't in that final battle, and that he kind of just pieced out and yeeted, and that he was like, no, I'm not, I disagree with you, but I'm not gonna fight my family, because we live in such polarizing times where you're a fanboy or you're a hater, and those are the only options, and we don't know how to disagree without becoming enemies. So I do think that it was kind of ridiculous to not have one of the main heroes in the movie in the final battle. But I liked his reasons for not being there, and I liked the human moment of Karun being like, I'm still with him and he's still my guy, but thank you for fighting for me.
Yeah. See, I forgot that. I remember when his valet leaves, because that was a cool moment. Like, thank you for fighting for humanity. I totally forgot that Mr. Bollywood bounced on the final fight.
I thought he was going to come back. Like, so he doesn't. I said, what happened?
Well, speaking of that, and I think this gets to your question, Clark, is just what does it mean to have diversity represented? What is cultural representation? Because I think for the folks that I've talked to that have just loved this film, they're like, the reason why I love it is because of the diversity, because of the cultural representation. And so I feel like, okay, let's stop and talk for a moment, because it's very important to understand what these terms mean. Diversity means intentionally including people from a range of racial, cultural, ethnic backgrounds, among other things. In this sense, I'd say, yes, the Eternals achieved that to the extent that you have 2 Asian characters, you have a South Asian, a Black Mexican woman, and a Latina. So it's, as you mentioned, the most diverse cast we've seen thus far in the MCU. That's awesome. But did they represent different cultures?
Right.
That is, after all, what cultural representation means.
Yes.
And so cultural representation is not only going to a movie and seeing your ethnicity represented on screen, but the ability to engage with your culture in meaningful ways through the action, through the dialogue, and through the visuals, aesthetics, and so on. And for us, like, in what ways were we as Asians able to engage with Asian culture in this film? Or in what ways were Latinos able to engage in Latin culture in this film, or Black people, or Native Americans for that matter? I will say, and I'd argue you can't. I will say, though, I'll give, shout out to Lauren Ridloff, though, because she represents the deaf community as a Black Mexican woman. I thought that was incredible. Her inclusion was awesome. It opened up a new image of who can be a superhero and what they contribute. But beyond this, I'd say that the film fell more into the trappings of tokenism than true cultural representation.
Right.
Which is so sad, because one of my favorite characters was the Asian man, his name is escaping me, who takes care of Athena.
Gilgamesh.
Yes. Yeah. And he's cooking for her, like he's faithful to her. Yeah. I felt like there could have almost been like a seed of Asian culture there, like the "have you eaten?" You know what I mean? Like, I feed you as my love language. He's cooking for her. He comes with that apron, kiss the cook. Like, there could have been so much more there. And the loss of that character, I felt very sad in that moment in the film.
And I think that's kind of where I was thinking, even along with that question of, there was so much potential they could have done there. I mean, granted, they could just be saying the Eternals are diverse because of who they are. They're Eternals. So we're just trying to give representation, but really they're this, created, alien race. But I mean, the fact that they went to the lengths to make them at least, racially diverse, there was a way I think it could have been tied in with just talking about some of the themes or the mythos of the other cultures they represented, people who looked like them on Earth. And that's where, unfortunately, I wish there was more there, because I think you're right. There wasn't cultural representation or diversity. It was kind of tokenism. And just
good,
knowing
commentary on the evangelical church.
Yeah.
The MCU, the Eternals, and the church. That's a conversation we need to have.
That really is. Wow. And even just thinking, knowing that Korean actor, I don't even know his name, but I recognize him because I've seen him in so many other Korean films.
Train to Busan.
Train to Busan's like the main one, but just knowing that they have this background they're bringing to the table, and it just was not leveraged, unfortunately. So that's where I wish we could have been able to look at these characters. And unfortunately, and maybe I'll say this may not go well, but I think the characters that were more developed were also the ones from more white mythos backgrounds, not necessarily as white characters, but their mythos being white or European, Western European. Those were the ones that seemed to be highlighted a little bit more. So unfortunately, that's how it was. But I wish there was a little bit more there. Mike, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to ask Michelle what she thought about Karun and his character, because there were times when I found myself laughing because he's supposed to be the comedic relief, but then there were other times when I kind of felt like I feel like they're just making him like the court jester, and
that's
in
how
some
I
ways
felt too,
that were not responsible or gracious or kind. Like, are you making jokes about Indian culture and then just expecting us to laugh? Like, are you manipulating me into laughing at Indian culture and at his accent? And I was like, the way you're playing this off, it's funny and it's entertaining, but like the more I thought about it, and after they'd done that a few times, I was kind of just like, oh, like, I'm not sure I like this. I like him. I like the character, but I'm not sure I like what they're doing here.
Yeah.
Could you
to me, he was like
the
Indian Jar Jar Binks of this film.
Yes.
Ouch. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. No, admittedly, when I first learned that his character would be representing a Bollywood film star, I cringed because I thought, oh, this is not going to go well. One, he's Pakistani. There's such a huge historical tension between Pakistanis and Indians. So to like have a Pakistani representing an Indian, that's complicated, first of all, and in a way that I think only Indians and Pakistanis would understand. Sure. The one is not replaceable for the other. Right. And then second, I completely agree. He was the Asian sidekick. He represented the slapstick comedic part of the film in a way that the other characters, they all came from these sort of rich mythological backgrounds, right? Like Athena, goddess of war, Hephaestus, also Greek mythology. Mercury is from Roman mythology. Icarus, Greek mythology too. What is Nanjiani's like? Where's his rich mythological background? It wasn't there. He and for someone like myself who grew up on Bollywood film, obviously there's comedic elements to it, and you kind of laugh at the I'm sure other Asian dramas are like this, right? They're 3 hours long, they like make you laugh, they make you cry, there's like 3 climaxes. Yes. You're like, it is still going, and then we're dancing some more, but I feel like his introduction where he's like he's dancing in that Bollywood moment, and he's making those facial expressions, it's all like turning it into a joke. And I didn't love it. I didn't love his characterization. I didn't love the way that he didn't reflect the Indian community, almost kind of like the crazy rich Indian, right? Like he's the one that has that private jet. He's very superficial. He bows out of the final battle. I was like, not a relatable character for me.
And his valet too. I thought there were moments where he was really lovable, but again, as the comedic relief, was kind of like court jestery.
Yes.
And if I'm honest, the Bollywood scene, they hyped that up way too much for what it was. Like, this is American MCU dollars going into the scene. And I was like, any Bollywood production beats this, like, no problem. Like, this it was not even that great of a Bollywood scene. Yeah, I was really disappointed in seeing that. I was like, I wonder if it was a pandemic thing, honestly, that they couldn't get as many people as they wanted to on set. So that could have been that, but just as even a Bollywood number, I just expected more. Yeah. And so, it was flat. And then, something that was a bit of a red flag for me was Kumail Nanjiani actually said that when he was on set and they told him what his powers were, he was like, wait, so I just like literally finger guns, and he was like, wait, so that, like, you're not going to give me anything? Like, I don't do it? And they were like, yeah, you just do it. And he was talking about in his mind, as he was doing his moves, he was like, God, I hope they make me look cool because I feel so dumb doing this. And I was just thinking in my head, like, that's such a red flag for something like that, you know?
He's like every young boy who's going, pew, 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 pew.
Yes! And I was like...
He must have had to try not to make pew, pew sounds so hard when he was doing those scenes.
Yeah. And so that's like why in that first action scene, I was like, okay, so he's literally, it's finger guns, and then it gets cooler later on because he can like charge it up Dragon Ball Z style and like blow up you. Like, okay, so I can get that. But then we never got more than that from him. And so again, even just in terms of him as a superhero, there was a loss in that potential. Like it could have been cool. There could have been a dozen ways to make that cooler. And I feel like they never got and so it's just a lot of
I thought he should have been more
lost.
powerful. Like if he could shoot those energy things, like he should have been able to take down those deviants no problem without needing Icarus to be able to fly in and save the day.
Well, pretty much
he had to,
none of them could, but Icarus.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. I kind of felt like I was like, I don't know. I think Kingo should have been more powerful than that if he can shoot stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
All around the movie.
Speaking of the deviants, I mean, who are they, right? Like, why did they matter, right? You had one of the deviants becoming sentient, right? Crow, that was his name, and I was like, okay, this is kind of cool, right? Talking about like using these beings to do all this, and again, that whole storyline of like, what does it mean for Arshem to be sovereign over these characters, and then they just literally slice
and then they just
up.
kill him.
It was just like
I'm like, you make me sympathetic towards the deviant and show me that he has like a conscience and that like
and then you just kill
the deviants and the Eternals basically are like just different versions of the same exact thing and race or creature, whatever.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we realize this connection, you bring the deviant in, and instead of fighting alongside each other to save humanity, you just slice him up and kill him.
Yeah.
Like, I'm walking out of the theater on Team Deviant. Like, what is happening here?
Also, regarding the deviants, there's a subtle plug for global warming in the sense that the deviants return to the Earth because the ice has begun to melt, you know?
Right.
So there's this subtle message that human annihilation is kind of humans' own fault. Like, we've brought it on ourselves. And you know, how does Cersei then save humans ultimately? She does so by freezing the monster, like bringing back the cold and the ice and from the erupting heat and lava from the ocean surface. And so I felt like there was also, I was like, oh, global warming. Oh, okay, we've moved on.
Yes, cool ideas that never fully ever get there. And just,
and then Cersei just solved it.
Yeah. Well, and like geologically, like what would happen to the Earth?
I mean, tsunamis galore. There's no question about it. Like just, if it would have been.
If he starts just float, like hatching out of the Earth, like the entire continents would be destroyed.
Yes.
I mean, what? And yet, you know, in the ongoing continuity of the MCU, is just going to be like, oh, we lost Atlantis, so now Namor's here. Like, ta-da! And there's going to be no other fallout to like a giant hatching out of the Earth. I don't know. I'm just so frustrated. Like, this would still destroy the Earth.
Now you're starting to sound like the Mike McGarry we know and are familiar with.
But I mean, even that whole storyline with Cersei about her not willing to, like, not thinking that she could use her powers, like that, even that struggle, that's good superhero stuff. Like struggling with how much you could do to solve this seemingly impossible problem. And then they had this whole thing of like Fastos develops the Unimind and they were going to all team up together, but then half of them leave. And like, does this still work? I don't know. That whole thing was a mess. And she was like, I can't do it. And all of a sudden she's like, you know what? No, I can't do it. I'm just going to do it right now. And then I was just like, what is happening right now? So even that, I feel like, again, so much potential there. Yeah.
Now we want to give a brief message from one of our sponsors, RTS. Do you want to be better equipped to serve the church? At Reformed Theological Seminary, you'll be mentored by faculty committed to the inerrant Word of God, Reformed theology, and the growth of their students. Degree programs include biblical studies, theology, pastoral ministry, and counseling, and they're all offered in residential, hybrid, or online formats, making theological education more accessible than ever. Cultivate a mind for truth, a heart for God, and a life for ministry at RTS. Learn more at rts.edu. So as much as Kevin could rant the whole podcast on totally hating on the film, there was one more thing I wanted us to talk about, and you guys all hinted at this, but it was this theme of like religious zeal and faithfulness and, you know, loyalty to your religious roots. And that was the whole tension with Ajax and Icarus. We get that kind of convoluted, very brief scene where Ajax like, I actually want to save humanity. And then Ajax like, no, I'm loyal to Arshem, so you die. But there was a lot of themes there, I think, that is very common today of what we're seeing with this questioning of your religious moral compass, with the idea of deconstructing your religion, and even like the whole idea of freedom. I think that's where maybe the Loki show handled it well, and maybe this movie fell a little flat because it played on the similar trope that true freedom is just breaking away from any hindering religious moral compass or any, you know, religious adherence. It just very much played into that trope. But what are some things we can talk about, maybe not through the film, but as a result of the film, whether it did it well or not? But, you know, when it comes to that, facing these understandings or beliefs about the system you grew up in, deconstruction, and then moving forward with a new set of morals and standards.
Yeah, I guess I think one of the big theological takeaways I had from it has to do with anthropology. Like, what does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to, like, are people good or are people evil?
Right.
And that whole philosophical debate. And then wrapped in too is that whole, like, the train scenario, right? Like, which track do you take if you're gonna, you know, derail an entire trainload of people, or do you run over one person? That The Good Place did way better than I think this movie did.
Right.
But like, so I think that all comes into it. So I don't know. I guess I'm answering first, but I guess I didn't see it. It is a deconstruction topic, but I didn't see it first and foremost as a question about like religious extremism as much as, is humanity worth it? Like, what is humanity worth? So I guess I don't know. I'll throw that out there too. Like, I think because I think in the movie, I think the deconstruction and the anthropology questions went hand in hand,
right,
with each other for these Eternals.
Well, and it's a confrontation between the character of Icarus, who probably represents like the fundamentalist, you know, zealot, versus really the rest of them, right, who are opening their eyes to the possibility of humanity and the special creation there. So
I was gonna make a joke that Mike sounded like Batman. Like, they're still worth saving. I have more to give. But I think, you know, if you wanted to like pull on that string, you see the Eternals like separating from their god, like the cosmic force, and saying, no, we know better and we're going to build better, which I think is in many ways a reflection of what happens to the ex-evangelicals who are in the deconstruction. Like, they end up deconstructing themselves out of the faith, right? Saying, you know, we're gonna pursue justice without Jesus. We're gonna pursue, you know, reforming society, but without necessarily the biblical foundations. I don't know if you want to pull the thread in that direction, but I think that's what we see, is them separating themselves from Arishem and saying, you know, we know better than you. We have a better way. Now, on the one hand, we're cheering for the Eternals. We're like, yes, don't destroy Earth. But in terms of like, what does that look like? Is there a parallel or application for our own faith today? I don't know. I don't know if you can make the one-to-one parallel.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's hard. You know what's funny is I left the theater thinking about that argument. So there's nobody that really argues on the other side that like the celestial inside the earth should be born, because they're gonna then go on to create this universe and billions of lives and stuff. I think Kingo does kind of mention it.
Kingo says that.
Yeah, and so, but I mean, he's the only one that's like, oh, but that's worth it, right? And then obviously Icarus, and you know, he's saying that as well. But the idea was like, to me, so the question that I leave with is more of like, how much suffering is worth the greater good argument for a lot of suffering that you sometimes hear, right? And I think that's worth exploring for sure. And that's the question that kind of came up for me. That again, I wish the movie did a lot of those things better, but I think that's definitely a discussion that comes up, especially for students who are in their own intimate suffering. When they hear an answer like, well, your suffering is for a greater good later on, how helpful is that for them, right? I was thinking more along that line as I was leaving the theater, you know, and then I was also super confused by the post-credit scenes. I just like all that stuff too, there. Right? Like, we will talk about that, but like, ruined it for me. But that was one of the, like, thinking about knowing that we were going to have this recording. I was thinking like, what's a theological theme that I'd want to bring up as something that comes up from that movie. I was thinking about that question because, again, I think that's something that the DCU movies wrestle with. like human suffering, how much is the breaking point before you are like enough, like this is too much suffering, we got to do something about it. Like Batman v Superman, right? That's the tension there, is Batman is like, there shouldn't have been any, right? Superman's this godlike being, and he didn't care about these lives and was just like laying waste to the city. And I feel like that's something that superhero movies for sure can explore because of the level of destruction and the power and capability that they're responsible for.
Because the CGI.
Yeah, all the CGI. But yeah, I thought that was something that, you know, could come out of this discussion as well, just with regards to like, well, but you know, could an argument be made, right, that Kingo is right and that really Earth should have been sacrificed because of the billions of, you know, galaxies and the universes that could have been created from this being? Like, isn't that worth it? Hasn't Earth done enough, right? Like, we've lived our existence, like 7,000 years of human existence is enough. Let's just move on, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a thought experiment worth thinking through and talking about, because I think that leads you to that place of, but human life is so valuable. And then you have to really, like you said, Mike, we're talking about human anthropology. Like, well, why is human life so valuable? What is it that makes us so valuable?
Right. Well, and that's what I was thinking with like that, the mid-credit scene where I always forget their names, where the three who are still on Earth get taken up and are said, like, I'm going to spare the Earth for now, but I'm going to check your memories to see if humanity is worth saving.
Right.
So like a thought experiment with students who you watch the movie with is to say, like, how would you evaluate that?
Yeah.
Right. Like, if you look at the scope of human history and of human experience today, how do we determine, like, was humanity worth it? You know, if it was up to you to make that decision.
Yeah.
So
it's a good thought. So I'll share two things that I was thinking about as I was coming out of the film. When I'm thinking about just like, what is the grander story this is pointing to? What are the truths that maybe like my students are going to pick up on when they're watching this, that I need to either do some, like, you know, damage control or some pointing to the truer and better beauty behind it. One, I think along that lines, I've heard this argument before in talking with an atheist, like, about the significance of humankind. And essentially the typical atheist argument goes that there is nothing special about humankind for it to exist beyond or outlive anything else in creation. Like, we are just like the animals. So, you know, Darwin's theory of natural selection applies across the board to, you know, vegetation, plant life, animals, and humankind. But I think that's one thing this movie does, you know, bring out, and that's actually something that's common throughout the entirety of just this genre of superheroes. It coming out of a Judeo worldview in all the original writers, that there's something special about the Earth and humanity that makes it the center point of all the multiverse and the cosmic universe, and why there's all these superheroes here. There's something special about humankind. So I think that's something that the movie does tease out, and I can acknowledge and appreciate for it. I think on the other side, so when I was watching the movie, I couldn't help but see all the biblical parallels the movie was trying to make, right? The opening scroll you get in the beginning, obvious nod to Genesis 1. When Icarus meets Ajax, it was 6 days before the emergence. And I think that was intentional as a, you know, parallel literary device to the 6 days of creation, or in this case, like recreation or destruction and recreation. And so you see these threads all throughout the movie. And I think, you know, when I was watching it, I was thinking, I'll bet as the makers of the movie were writing this, they had like the Judeo-Christian God in mind as Arishem, who's this, you know, cold judging God who's distant and who's just going to make some hard choices, but really it's to balance the universe, right? It's just about the balance of good and evil. And I think a lot of students today probably view God that way, like in Arishem. And so that's why they would champion the Eternals, you know, demise or stopping of the emergence. And I think just something that, you know, that I find myself constantly thinking about and having to, when I'm engaging with non-believers or non-Christians in the youth ministry, or just kids who are working out their faith, is that the God who's portrayed in media is not the God of the Bible. The way that Arishem is portrayed is not, as much as you may see parallels and the writers think that they're portraying the Christian God, that's not who he is. I think that's why it's so important to reiterate that, like, God did not stay beyond the universe. Like when Arishem comes and judges, he's like, well, I got to figure out if humanity was worth saving. Like, God knew that they were worth saving, but they couldn't be saved on their own accord. So he stepped in to identify with them in Emmanuel, in the incarnation. And so that's where that's where I was thinking, like, you have this whole deconstruction because Icarus is the zealot who's loyal to Arishem, and yet everyone else sees that Arishem's plans are ultimately not good. And I wonder, like, I just keep going back to this thought of, like, I think, like, we want, like, a good judge who we can be loyal to, so we don't have to fight our own battles, so we don't have to be left on our own. And it's not portrayed correctly in the MCU, but we get these little glimpses and pictures of it. So that's just what I came away thinking, how I was thinking, like, when I'm picking up on what my students are probably going to hold on to or ask questions about, that was one thing that came to mind.
So good. I love that literary analysis, Clark.
Well, you're the expert, so I'm just
I don't know
dabbling
about that.
and trying.
That was good.
The 6 day thing was good. I've been complaining about that mainly because of the plot device, but actually thinking of it from the parallel, that makes sense.
Totally a parallel.
Yeah. I don't know why I didn't catch that, but that's good. Yeah.
I know our time with you, Michelle, is running short. So just any last things you want to say on the movie, or just in general when it comes to, like, what draws you to the MCU, and as you apply your own, like, your worlds colliding of your studies, your expertise, your faith, and this universe.
Oh man. Well, I'm with Kevin. I didn't understand the post-credit scenes. I'm trying to figure out, like, what they're going to do with Kit Harington's future now with with the Eternals. It is interesting if you look at just sort of everything that's been released this year in the MCU. There is more of a feminist bent. I think they tried to have that bent in the Eternals, but failed. I mean, there was that commentary right about Icarus underestimating Cersei. Like, there's supposed to be this, like, she's the underdog that kind of comes through as the leader, underdeveloped. I think it goes back to the final Avengers Endgame scene, right, where all those women are on the battlefield, like coming forward, which is, like, such a kitschy moment. And I'm like, what is the purpose of this? And I'm like, okay, this is the MCU trying to declare the future of MCU as female. And I think we're going to see more of that, more female characters rising up. Is it productive? Is it successful in terms of, like, rethinking, reimagining the female superhero? Is it like trying to bake too many things into the pie and everything just kind of comes out half done? I'm not totally convinced that I say we, like, I'm a part of this, that the MCU has been successful thus far. Although, we have Miss Marvel coming, we have a female Thor coming. But I will say they have taken greater strides with its feminist commentary than with its diversity commentary. And I wish, I'd love to see more of a balance with that. But I think the Eternals is a perfect representation of, like, trying to be feminist and just totally missing the mark in terms of diversity. So we'll see what's still to come with the MCU.
And there's a lot to come.
Yeah. Well, and it'll be really interesting to see. I guess I'm still chewing on your comments about representation and, like, what that actually means. It'll be really interesting to see how they handle that with the Miss Marvel series.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. Which is something that, I think Kevin and I both agreed they did really well with Shang-Chi. There was total cultural representation there. And a lot of our Black friends said that for Black Panther. So how they can expand beyond those two, I'm hopeful, but Eternals made me a little bit more skeptical, I guess. So we will see.
Yeah. I wish we could just pluck this movie out of the MCU and just let it be like Marvel.
Someone needs to snap their fingers, make it go away.
Yeah.
Can you do that? That would be great.
So Thanos is the hero. Yeah. They were implying that in the movie too, right?
Yep.
I think it there's a version of this movie that is amazing, and I just want to hold it in my head that's
It exists in your mind.
In the metaverse
That's what's
somewhere.
going on there. Yeah.
A version
But I mean,
of this movie that has a completely different plot line.
yeah. But I will say, I mean, one thing that this movie's done is really it has struck up a ton of conversations, I think, about like the diversity question for sure, but like even storytelling. All of a sudden, everybody's an expert storyteller, right? Like every person is like, "Oh, I would have done it this way," and like it's like
That's
not how
lazy
these
storytelling.
Yeah, that's not how these things work. You know,
Who
this
said that?
is difficult
but-
stuff. I mean, like the movie is gorgeous looking, right? Like Chloe Zhao
Yeah.
definitely knows how to shoot a movie and a story for sure. So there's other things that are happening in the background that we're clearly not aware of in terms of like what went wrong with the film. But you know, she's also not like blaming other people, right? She's not like, well, the studio heads got involved and took the movie away from me. I mean, she's standing by her vision of the movie, which I actually really appreciate, because I do think that she's being responsible for the way that she stewarded this project. And look, nobody's perfect, you know. And like I said, I appreciate what I can appreciate most about this movie is the swing for the fences. Like, I mean, this movie goes way beyond any other
Swing and a miss.
any other MCU project, and like she brings the cosmic side in ways that's like it just opens up this huge thing, and so I think I can appreciate it for that for sure. I just do think that it just got weighed down by so many like it's super just crazy ambitious.
Yeah.
So last thing I'll say. So I say that all the time, and then I keep talking.
Thank you.
But I saw them somewhere. They said that the first draft of the script had 12 Eternals in it, and then they cut 2. So
That's
they
what I
had
saw
even
too.
more
Yeah.
than they ended up having.
Well, because they
So
needed those biblical
I think
numbers.
the problem.
They needed 12.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I don't think the problem was Chloe Zhao. I think the problem was the script writing.
Right. Yes.
But she's credited as a scriptwriter.
Was
Like
a
I said,
scriptwriter
I don't
too.
know. Yeah, she
Of
did write
one
the
of
movie.
4, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I think she did write the initial treatment, and then people came in.
Well, okay.
But- So I don't know.
I stand corrected.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that about does it. You know, as you can probably tell, we didn't really enjoy this movie. If you did, we would love to hear from you. I want to hear strong defense for this movie, because I still think it's not the worst MCU movie. Thor 2 is. So please drop us a line. You can reach out to us on our Twitter, Instagram at Thanos to Theos, or thanostheos@gmail.com. Again, we're so thankful to have Michelle Ami Reyes here with us. If you want to check out more of Michelle's stuff, she's written a book, Becoming All Things. You see it on the back of her screen. You have a new one coming out in next spring, correct? It's like going to be a
Right.
family discipleship guide, or family, which I think is super cool. Do you want to just briefly drop a line for that?
Sure. Yeah. So I have the joy of co-authoring this next book with Helen Lee, who works for University Press. It's called The Race-Wise Family, and the subtitle is 10 Postures to Becoming Households of Healing and Hope. And it's a very practical handbook, just helping parents walk through how to navigate issues of culture, race, justice with their kids. And so each chapter walks through like a big topic, like what is white privilege? You know, how do you, we have kid-friendly definitions. We've got scripture. We've got family activities, including like books and films to watch with discussion questions. Each chapter ends with a prayer. How to talk about racism. What happens when there's a racial national tragedy? Like, how do you bring up that topic with your kids? If you're a family of color, how do you like make safe spaces to like heal from racial pain? What does it mean as a Christ followers, as a Christian family, to like pursue kingdom-minded diversity, pursue biblical justice? So those are some of the chapters that we have, and it's all very like practically rooted, so parents can like read it and feel like they can go up, like start applying it with their family right away. So that comes out May 17th, 2022.
Awesome.
Very cool.
And would you say that's directed more towards parents with young kids or parents with teenagers too?
So we try to do the spectrum, and so
Right.
we have sections. There's the application for parents with, toddlers, parents with elementary, middle school, and then high school. So we try to like give
That's
application for each age range.
I love that.
That's cool.
Awesome.
Yeah,
So
thanks for doing that.
Yeah, I think that'll be a fantastic resource for all of our youth pastors, parents, and family pastors that are connected with Rooted. So,
Thank you.
Again, we thank you so much for your time, Michelle. Again, if you want to check out more of Rooted's content, check out the website, www.rootedministry.com. And please go check out more of Michelle's stuff. We look forward to having you on it again.
Oh, I love that.
Hopefully before the Ms. Marvel show, but definitely for that one, we'll want to have you back on for that.
Hey, sounds good to me. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm not mad weary. I'm sad weary.
You've been waiting for that.
I've been saving that. I wrote it down as a way to say bye and end this episode. I did it.
Wow. Not a bit in the least cheesy.
No, not at all.
Please cut the recording after we call you out for planning this.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I will.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thanos to Theos, part of the Rooted Network family of podcasts. For more resources designed to equip and encourage you to faithfully disciple students towards lifelong faith in Jesus Christ, be sure to find Rooted on the web at www.rootedministry.com.